Now, I've got something that I'm supposed to do that I have had just the darndest time with. I'm just going to admit it. And I'm going to be honest with you. This thing, it really shouldn't be that hard, but I just can't seem to get myself there. And it's not procrastination. I'm not a procrastinator. I've set myself up to do this thing several times. It involves making a video, you see. So I have gotten dressed in my fancy clothes, good enough to be on screen. I've gotten my makeup on, my TV makeup even. And then I sit down in front of the camera, and for some reason, I just can't do it. Now, I have given myself deadlines, and I have blown through all of them. Again, something that I don't do. And if you know me, you know that never happens. And in fact, when I was in school, I would always set a deadline. Say I had a paper due on January 14th. I would make sure that I was done with the first draft of that paper by January 7th so that I could turn it in early to my professors and get feedback and not get anything less than an H, which at Yale is an A. Okay, so I was not trying to mess around, right? So I don't blow through deadlines. In this role as pastor, there's tons of output. I have to preach every week, get to preach every week, and there's just a lot we put out. Stephanie and Kevin and I, Stephanie, who's behind the scenes right now, and Kevin and I are churning out content online all the time. So it's not that either. For whatever reason, and I'm being very honest and even vulnerable with you here, I just haven't been able to make this particular video. And I couldn't figure out why. Has that ever happened to you? Yes, right? And I don't know, you know how the algorithm just knows how to read everything through us, and it's kind of scary? But anyway, I was struggling with this, and then there was this whole video about it, and this woman was discussing it, and she was citing Jeffrey Pfeffer's work, in which he claims that the mark of success is having a very short distance between a decision and the action that needs to follow to get it done. And many people and organizations know exactly what they need to do, but then they fail to act on it. And success then often hinges on how quickly knowledge turns into behavior. So the principle is that decisive action, even if it's imperfect, beats prolonged hesitation. Mel Robbins talks about this too. She says that if you feel the impulse to act, you should go ahead and do it within 5 seconds, or your brain's going to talk you out of it. You heard that theory? So I kind of agree on many things that they're right. But here's the thing. I am very, very good at executing on big decisions. It's how I got here, right? And that's no small feat. But it's also how I've stayed here for 10 years, despite being the first woman in 218 years in this role. It's not simple, it's been a little difficult, but I know how to take thought and turn it into action, and those fire pretty close to each other almost all the time in here. And I'm also really good at hesitating for a moment and then plunging ahead with something that's gonna be hard. Pfeffer and Robbins would love me. I'm a great case study, except for this video. I can't record it. I just can't plunge through this time because, honestly, that framework I gave you is missing a key element. So now, come with me to the text so we can learn about what's missing. This text, as I mentioned, is so complex that if someone doesn't break it down for you, you can miss a lot. And every time I read it, I see something else I hadn't seen. Okay, so it starts with Jesus in Capernaum, which is by the Sea of Galilee. It's beautiful there. It's quiet. It's also an area where, a lot of revolutionary action comes from. Can anything good come out of Galilee? Is because these people are kind of rabble-rousers. But anyway, Jesus is sitting at somebody's house, and that was his base of operations for his ministry and for that part of his story. There Jesus is, busy speaking, when a man, and we're going to call him Jairus because Mark and Luke do, even though Matthew doesn't, his name's Jairus. And Jairus breaks into Jesus' teaching. Now, I am not Jesus. But if somebody rolled up into church right now while I'm talking and was like, hey, I need you to stop right now, come with me to my house, there is very little chance that I would say, okay, y'all, just wait a minute, I'm gonna go with him, just wait along. But as I mentioned, I am not Jesus, so don't do that. But anyway, that's exactly what he did. So Jesus stands up, and he and the disciples start rolling on over to Jairus' house. That's movement 1, okay? Now, movement 2 starts with this fringe. And when I hear fringe, I think of something decorative like this. I actually brought this just for a sermon illustration to show you fringe, right? But as it turns out, it's freezing, so it's a good thing I had it. Look at God, inspiring me to stay warm. But anyway, when I think of fringe, this is what I think of, something decorative, right? But that isn't where Matthew is headed with this. It's not what he means. He actually is using, because there's a word for this kind of fringe, but he uses a different Greek word, which can be translated to the Hebrew tzitzit. Okay, so I think that might be on your screen. Did it pop up? Okay, and that shows you what it looks like. It's different from this. The tzitzit you've seen, it's the modern version of it is what you see the Orthodox Jewish men wearing, where they have like that little tassel that hangs like about here. But in Jesus' day, it would be like a combination of this and that. So an outer garment that would hang, and then the tassel would be about right here on the calf or a little bit lower, okay? So that's where this woman is going to reach. And the purpose of the tzitzit on what is now the tallis is that they would have it there, and it would swing around with you, and it would be a constant reminder of God's covenant action, of God's commandments that you're supposed to keep, and God's deliverance. So every time one of these commandments would come in the book of Numbers or Leviticus, it would say, do this thing, for example, wear the tallis, and because I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Israel, okay? So when this woman comes, while Jesus is on his way to Jairus' house, she reaches out for that fringe, right? But until I thought about it, I had always just assumed that she just kind of like reached like this. But in order to get to the fringe where Jesus was, she would have had to get low, real low, to touch the bottom of the fringe, right? And she doesn't say a word. Note that. That's movement 2. Now Jesus goes ahead, and after he heals her, he continues to Jairus' house. And after getting rid of all the rabble-rousers, the loud mourners, the professional mourners they're called, he comes to the girl who's lying on a pallet, probably on the floor. He ministers to her. We'll talk more about what happens there later, but that's movement 3. And what I need you to notice is something really, really important. In both cases, Jesus is busy. People interrupt him and he responds. Remember that. And now I need you to think about who he responds to. First, it's Jairus, who asks on his daughter's behalf. She's unalive at the time, so clearly she can't speak for herself. But peep this. The woman also doesn't say anything to Jesus either. All Matthew gives us is her internal dialogue. If I could only just reach out and touch the hem of his garment, then I will be healed. She doesn't say that out loud. Now, the woman and the girl get their healing, but the way they get there is different. Someone else's supplication in the one case, internal dialogue in the other. There's not just one path. And Jesus, by the way, hears all of it. Think about it. Jairus had the thought, this baby's gone. Parents aren't supposed to lose their children. I was supposed to go first. Lord, why didn't you take me? Not her. That's Jairus' thought. And you don't want to, but you can imagine what he would have been thinking, his acute thoughts. The woman's thoughts were desperate too, but in a different way. My life feels like it's over. I've lost so much. I feel so weak. My grief, my disappointment, they're too much. I am at my wit's end. That is her thought, her chronic thinking. Both are speaking from the same place of longing. And what do? They reach out. Him with her words, her with her touch. They come to Jesus, they take that step forward. And you, beloved, you have longing too. I don't know what you're dealing with, and I pray that it's nothing as heavy as what these folks were dealing with, but you might be. And we all are carrying our own grief in one way or another, whether acute or chronic. Grief has the effect of making your world so small. You can only take on as much as you can, and that gets to be less and less. It becomes so much harder to move from thought to action, or to make any movement at all. And that's got a name. It's called the paralysis of grief, and it's very, very real. It's very human. I gave you a framework for how things happen, thought and action, right? But what I didn't name for you is what occupies the space in between. Or should I say, who occupies that space? Because you see, sometimes when everything is going great and you can go straight from this to this and there's very little space in between and you're on fire, right? You're good and all these things are happening. And when these two things happen without very much space, you can forget to look deeper and remember where all good things come from. See, sometimes God needs to make a little space between here and here so that you have the opportunity to go deeper. See, sometimes the thought happens, but the action that follows shouldn't. That happens. And if you get in the wrong thought and action pattern, something's got to give. God's got to interrupt. Space needs to come. Or maybe you're like me and you're used to firing off the things, but on some things you just get stuck. Sometimes that paralysis is God asking for you to do some analysis. Remember that video that I need to record? It happens to be for someone I love a lot. When I asked if I could share the story here, his lawyers gave me the okay conditionally with some guidelines, but I can't get too specific. What I can say is that he's a Black American man born on a U.S. military base abroad to parents who are U.S. citizens now. His dad was in the service, active duty, living on base with his mom, who lived on base too, and then she went to the U.S. military hospital and gave birth. That's what they all were doing what they were supposed to do. He grows up here in Brooklyn, but then he caught a case and locked up. What happened? He was about 18 when that happened. Locked up, he found God. He studied, he got a degree. He cleaned up his life. And on release, he did what he was supposed to do. He started businesses. He even started a nonprofit, a very successful nonprofit that works with kids in his neighborhood to teach them some critical skills and business skills so that they can carry his expertise. He got married, and I love his wife. But ICE. Expletive, ICE. ICE decided that his parents did not fill out the paperwork properly when he was born 30 years ago on that U.S. military base, decades ago, and now they are denying that he is a U.S. citizen. And since he had an arrest, since he had an arrest on record, they've been trying to deport him to Haiti, where he's never been, not even for 1 minute. His mother's from Haiti, but he'd never been there. And when they kidnapped him and disappeared him a few years back, thanks to people like Merrill Rancer and Ravi Rugbeer and the New Sanctuary Coalition, his incredible legal team, and for those of us who've been fighting ICE for years, we were able to get him out of detention. And back then, I led press conferences for him, rallies. I stood in front of crowds and said everything about his story. So when they asked me to make this video, it should have been so easy. It would just be another one of those things. It's an easy ask, obvious, right? But I haven't been able to move from my decision to do the video and the action of recording it. Why? And it took me a minute or actually a few weeks, to answer this, but I'm going to share the answer. It's because I did do a bunch of really hard things related to situations like this again and again over the years. And I would turn the decision into action. I was really good at that and powering through. But at some point, the powering through took a piece out of me each time. And eventually, there were almost no pieces left. And each time doing this thing that I do, which is that I take on people, I listen to people's stories, and then I take on their pain, to the point where eventually there weren't enough pieces and I collapsed to the floor because the weight was more than I can bear. Has that ever happened to you? Of course. So what I did is, without actually making the decision to do this, I stopped much of my public work on immigration, because I just couldn't handle that piece of it anymore, standing in front of the crowds, in front of the cameras. I moved it all underground, and I still do the work, but it's behind the scenes, because I can't manage being up front anymore, at least right now. So I stopped the public work without actually making a decision to do it, which is why I think when I need to cross the line back in front of the camera, I can't get myself to. Now, if I had gone and done it automatically like I used to, I'd be trying to record from down here on the floor, which is a terrible place for that. God needed me to slow down, slow the F down, because between here and here happened to be a whole lot of God and a whole lot of work that I needed to do with God. I had to acknowledge my grief. I had to acknowledge my limitations, that I am not God. I am not Jesus. I can't just operate interrupted and do everything. I can't do it. It meant something crucial because you see, and for the longest time, I really struggled with this, and maybe I still do, but I felt like I had no right to feel some kind of way about my struggles with all this because, at least for now, I have all the protections a U.S. citizen gets, right? So what's my little problem compared to the people who don't know if they walk outside and get kidnapped, disappeared? I don't face anything close to what our friends and neighbors and our families and some of you face with ISIS persecution. My situation is nowhere near as bad. But then I took a look at this text from Matthew, which I happened to have assigned to myself to preach a long, long time ago before I knew about this situation. And with that lens and from that place, I saw the gospel. And I saw Jesus busy, doing one thing and then interrupted in different ways. And it didn't matter how long or how they did it. It didn't matter how long it took them to do it. It didn't matter that one need was chronic and the other was acute. It didn't matter that maybe she was chronically bleeding, but someone somewhere else was bleeding even more. Or that he lost one child, but someone somewhere else had lost several. That didn't matter. What mattered is that they were in their pain. The story teaches us something completely different than our instincts tend to say. I hear you all say it all the time. What does God care about my little problem when people are facing so much worse? But that envisions a God with a scarcity problem, and our God doesn't have that. Remember, who's busy? The devil's busy, but God is never too busy. The infinite doesn't know limits. And when I realized that the existence of someone else's pain doesn't cancel mine out, that pain needs God's healing no matter how strong it is, grief is real, I have it, and so does everybody else. God needed me to take the time in that humble space, truly, to turn my paralysis into my own internal analysis, to look inside and to understand why it was so hard to do what I know needs to be done, to allow myself to weep and to acknowledge my own pain, different but real. If I had jumped from here to here, I would have missed that step where first I reach. When your world gets small, truly, it's because you are doing what you believe you have to make it, to survive, which takes you to the place where you only do what you know you have to, but many times that means that all you can manage is, when something's wrong in front of you, is to look away. A lot of us are facing this right now, especially as this country happens to be in a gigantic mess. It doesn't have to be, but it is, and it has been for a while. We wouldn't be here if we hadn't made the wrong choices and looked away. When I say we, I don't mean us necessarily, but I mean we collectively. If we hadn't looked away when things were wrong, we're here, but we need to get here. And in the enormous space between these two things, that gap is actually going to keep getting wider unless we look within and take a real hard, deep look. God requires our careful analysis. We can't keep jumping from thing to thing, election to election, pretending everything's okay without looking deeper. We can't jump over the wrongs when they keep happening. It's going to be years before we make things right. And while we wait, we've got to look. We have to revise and rethink and recalibrate and recalculate. The old ways just aren't going to work anymore because we've got to be more honest and not get stuck in paralysis and grief saying, oh, but if only, and back when it used to be, we can't do that. We have to look where God is looking, which is into our futures, and believe that it's worth fighting for this gap to be filled with God's grace. There's a way to get acclimated to things that are plainly wrong. For 12 years, she hemorrhaged. Now, what if she had gotten used to it? What if she just accepted that to be her plight? What if she was entirely focused on a different goal than stopping the bleeding? A hemorrhaging woman, you realize, would have been pretty much unmarriageable, and in that time, that's kind of almost a death sentence in and of itself. You need a man to live and all that in her time, right? So what if, for most of those 12 years, she had decided that the next step, the fix to her big problem, was to find a husband? What if the thought was something's wrong and the answer was husband? If she had jumped from this to this, from problem to husband, she wouldn't have experienced the most important part, because the healing that God intended for her had to do with the bleeding, not with the husband. And she had to acknowledge that this was all a problem and worthy of God's action and attention. So maybe our country, maybe our city, maybe our homes are hemorrhaging right now. We've got monkey tropes, and we bleed. We've got the disappearing and the kidnapping, and we bleed. We can't stand to talk to our neighbors, we keep bleeding. The escalation on all fronts is a hemorrhage, but the gospel already told you who is an expert at stopping that bleeding. And Jesus does have answers. We need God's help. So do you, and so do I. And we better do something with this moment in the gap. Beloved, never, ever miss the opportunity God is offering you in your in-between time, because God has the time for it. Will you make the time, or is God going to have to make that time for you? Whatever paralysis you're facing today, do your analysis. Listen to how God is teaching. Interrupt God and ask for the healing. It'll take time, but God has time. It'll expose some things you don't want to see or feel, but God has the energy for it. It'll surface pain that you've tucked away. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but you already knew that. God has time. Will you say that? God has time. And of course, I have good news to share. Immediately after service today, I'm going to pull some sort of stool up right here, and I'm going to look into the camera back there, and you're going to see me take my seat. And per his lawyer's request, we're going to stop the broadcast. I'm going to say a prayer, look straight into that camera, and Stephanie's going to record that video. I'm ready. Right? Come on now, this is a big deal. So if you want, you can come and witness me finally completing what I decided to do weeks ago. I'm going to get from here to here. And most importantly, I just offer that story as an example of how God can do something incredible with these moments that expose the healing that we need. Never forget, God's already taking time for you. So wherever you are, just reach. That's what we mean when we say come to Jesus, because don't you know, Jesus has already come to you. When you reach out, that hand is there to hold you fast. Let the healing come. Amen. Thank you so much for joining us for this element of worship. We are so grateful that you have entrusted the park with this moment to hear music, to listen to the Word of God, whatever it may be. And we just ask for your support. The park only functions with the generous donations of people like you. And 100% of your donation goes to the incredible ministries of this church, which give and give and give again. Thank you for the ways that you give in advance and for all that you might be ready to give in the future. God bless you, and amen.